This is the Her Earth Medicine podcast, based around traditional Eastern medicine and naturopathic insight to support wellness and longevity. My name is Sandy Ross, and I am a naturopath and practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Today on the podcast, I bring back once again David Hartmann. David has been an acupuncturist for more than 20 years. David has a master's degree in acupuncture and has been a college lecturer for over 15 years here in Australia. David has taught workshops worldwide all throughout Australia, New Zealand and in Europe. He's also a published author of 2 books, the Acupoint Dictionary, which got me through college, and also the Principle and Practical Application of the Acupuncture Point Combinations textbook. David is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to emotional-based conditions, so today I bring him back on to talk about the 8 extraordinary channels. If you like this conversation, please check out our previous episode where I interviewed David on his top 10 acupuncture point combinations. Let's dive in and talk the 8 extras with David Hartmann. Welcome to the Her Earth Medicine podcast. Once again, David Hartmann.
Hello, thank you, Sandy.
Thanks for joining us again, David. We got a lot out of your last episode, so I'm really happy to have you back on. And today we're going to be talking about the 8 extras, which is really interesting to discuss. I think a lot of students learn about the 8 extras and maybe they dabble with them in clinic, but you've got a great depth of knowledge, so I'm really excited to chat about them. So maybe before we get started, just recap us on yourself and how you became a acupuncturist and to where you are today.
Sure, thanks, Sandy. I started studying acupuncture when I was 19. It's similar to you in that we got into it fairly early in our lives, which is very unusual. Loved it, did great at it, which is funny because I was so bad at school, got terrible grades and didn't enjoy it. But the acupuncture course, just something about it had me knowing I was in the right place. And since then, that was 1993, I started studying. So I've been basically treating patients since 1994 from student clinic onwards. Within the last sort of 15 years, I've gotten a lot more interested in treating emotion-based conditions, and I found that the 8 extraordinary vessels is something that's in my toolkit for that. But very interestingly, I guess, as an aside, when I was studying acupuncture, we had a teacher that said that the 8 extras were terrible. He taught the subject and he told us that the 8 extras didn't work. They were useless. He didn't believe in them. He assessed us on the 8 extras and basically, I think, convinced all of us that they were useless and didn't work. So I basically graduated and ignored the 8 extras for probably 10 years. And then they fell back in my lap again, and I looked back into it and I went, I don't know if I agree with that, and did my own research and have found them to be quite extraordinary, hence the name. But other than that, currently I'm treating patients. I'm writing online workshops, live workshops when we're live again. And I'm the module leader for the Northern College of Acupuncture in York in England. It's a master's degree. So I look after the Chinese classics subject, which is an online master's degree. So that's kind of cool. So I hope that answered your question.
Yep, definitely. Great. So, I'd love to chat more and hear about that course, but I'll come back to that. Let's dive into the 8 extras. So tell us about them. What's the history of the 8 extras and what do they actually mean?
Okay, so the 8 extraordinary vessels in Chinese is Qi Jing Ba Mai, which translates essentially as the 8 extraordinary vessels. So Qi is extraordinary, Jing is vessel or channel, Ba is 8, and Mai is more like a vessel or a tube that fills and empties, which is different to, I guess, normal descriptions of the main channels. The main channels sort of move qi and blood and body fluid and jing through them constantly, almost like highways where cars are running 24/7. The 8 extraordinary vessels store excess vital substances. So they store excess qi, excess jing, excess fluid, excess blood. And so they can store it, so fill up, and then they can empty, which isn't emptying completely, but is taking what they have in them and throwing it back into the body to give you a burst of some of those substances. So that's what my MAI actually means. It's like a tube that fills, stores, distributes, empties. It can close off. So the 8 extras can hold the substances and not give it out, which can happen both as a positive and a negative. People that say have chronic fatigue syndrome would be crying out for their 8 extras to give them that stored energy, but the body won't do it because it's core level energy at that point. And if you're not careful, you'll become even more fatigued. So if you were to force the energy out into the body, theoretically, someone with chronic fatigue would feel wonderful for a couple of days, but then they'd be absolutely smashed. They'd be so exhausted afterwards because you're using up what your body needs. So the 8 extras kind of close off when they feel like you're not giving the body enough to survive on a day-to-day level. So essentially, I guess you eat, you drink, it produces a certain amount of vital substances that your body uses throughout the day. Hopefully there's some left over. The 8 extras store it and go, well, we'll give that back to you down the track. But, obviously, if we don't eat or drink enough, then we don't produce enough for the body, and that's where we end up with issues. So that's what the 8 extras are defined as. What was that answering the question, or was there another part to that?
Yeah,
Sandy?
yeah. So, I mean, do you want to tell us what they actually are? What are the channels?
Yep, so there's 8 of them. They travel around the body. They're deeper than all of the other pathways that we have in Chinese medicine. So there isn't just the 12 main pathways of which we put needles in the body into. Like, say, the lung channel, for example. There's 11 points on the channel. You can needle the channel on the points, on the channel that isn't quite on the points, and it will activate that particular channel. The 8 extras are deeper. And so they're considered to be the deepest channels we have. They're produced or made almost at our conception. So when we're at the point of our conception, we get our mum and dad's energy and our ancestral energy. And it creates this little ball of energy, which is called the dantian. And from that, as we grow out from that, the 8 extras expand out from that space. So the exciting prospect of that is that we can get to core level genetic energies, diseases, disorders, because that's where they start. As we grow into ourselves, that dantian tends to sit between the kidneys, in behind the belly button or slightly below, and that's where the 8 extras start. So, as I said, deepest level energy. So if you want to treat a genetic disorder, the 8 extras are what you would target, but we'll talk about that a bit later. But also, because they're the deepest layer in us, disease that comes from external or disease that we create ourselves through maybe poor eating habits and what have you, that disease starts on the outside and starts to work its way into the body. So if you want to get under that, the 8 extras get under it and start to push it back out to the surface so that you process and deal with it. So it creates a healing from the inside out, because there is no deeper level than the 8 extras. But otherwise, they travel around the body. They're not everywhere, but they spread their energy everywhere.
That's a great explanation. I've always thought about the 8 extras as a part of our genetic material and sort of in that DNA or epigenetic expression ability. I think I've used them most with like chronic Jing stuff, fertility associations and stuff like that, because I'm thinking of that DNA. So it's great to hear you kind of clarify that. Can you maybe walk us through, say we've got some, first or second year students, can you actually walk us through the channels?
Yeah, so we have the Renmai or conception vessel. It's got a number of different names. It runs up the midline on the front of the body. So it starts in that dantian, so at that midpoint, as I said, behind the belly button. It comes out in the groin, so in a rather unfortunate location that it surfaces at, and then it travels up the midline of the body and essentially finishes just below the bottom lip. There are internal pathways that do a whole bunch of other funky things which we don't really have time to get into, but that's essentially the Renmai. The Dumai starts in exactly the same spot, so in the dantian. It comes out also in the groin area in another inconvenient location, and it travels up the back of the body, so essentially below the vertebra. And so at certain spots below different vertebrae, you can needle there and it will activate the Dumai. Travels up the spine, up over the top of the head, and comes back down the front of the head and the front of the face, and it finishes inside your mouth. If you put your tongue up into your mouth behind the top gum, you'll feel a little piece of, it's not cartilage, but a little piece of, almost feels like a bit of skin. That's where the Dumai actually finishes.
Oh.
So again, not the best spot to be sticking a needle, I get that. So then the Ren and the Do actually link up in your dantian. They link up when they come out in your groin, and they link up again in your mouth and around your lips. So there's this kind of circuit that's happening there. But they both start and travel in the same direction, which is up the body. You have the Dumai, which is translated as girdle or belt vessel. It basically travels across you. It's the only channel of the 8 extras and even the main channels that travels across you. And so it travels essentially from the front to the back. It cuts through your dantian, so it has another link to the Ren and the Do through that process. It's like if you were to stick a dinner plate right through your belly button and back out the other side. It's kind of how the Dumai sits, except it's stepped. So it's not completely straight. But because it runs front to back and across ways, it links every single other channel that we have in the body. So it makes it very, very powerful in regards to regulating energy up and down the body. Let's say you have a really red face, maybe you have rosacea or high blood pressure, lots of yang energy, heat up in your head, but your hands are cold, and say your ankles are swollen, then the Dumai actually looks at redistribution. So it looks at sending the heat that's up in your head down to your hands to warm them up and down to your feet to dry out the liquid. And it also sends the fluid from your ankles back up to the head to put out the fire, so water to put out the fire, and it sends the cool energy from your hands up to your face to cool your head. So it's very dynamic in what it can do. The Chongmai is similar, but it doesn't cut through you. So the Chongmai is often called a penetrating vessel. It's got a range of different names, thoroughfare, etc. It's a strange one because it splits and goes in lots of different directions. So it also starts in the dantian, comes out again in your groin, and then it splits. It's got some energy that travels up your trunk bilaterally beside your belly button, potentially all the way up to the top of your chest, to your collarbone. It also has energy that travels down your legs, both the outside of the legs and potentially the inside of the legs as well. So it also regulates energy up and down the body, but it's also classically used for regulating blood, which makes it a very good point for women's health, especially things like amenorrhea, dysmenorrhea, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, a range of other things like that. But they're the four that are probably considered the most important because they all start in that Dantian space. And they're the deepest ones we have. Then they actually step out a bit for the remaining four. So we go out, we step out to the Yang Chao and the Yin Chao, and Chao means step. So it's a way of remembering what happens there. You have the four deeper ones, then we have the step out to the Yin and Yang Chao Mai. They're sometimes called heel vessels because they start the inside and the outside of your ankle bones. And they travel up your legs, both the inside and the outside, and they finish up on your head. And then we step out again to the Wei Mai, Yin and Yang Wei Mai, which Wei is linking. So they're the most external of the 8 extras, but they're still deeper than any other channel. And the Yin and Yang Wei Mai, or linking, they link the 8 extras to the general circulation, the general channels. And so that's another way of remembering that they're the most external of the 8 extras because they link the 8 extras to the 12 main channels. And the Yin and Yang Wei Mai, they also start down on the inside and outside of the legs and travel also up to the head. And they regulate energy to and from the head and face, but they do a range of different things. But they're slightly less understood and used compared to the four deeper ones.
Okay, so you actually gave us a little description on, I think, the Chong and the Daimai, just briefly then touching on the linking. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more about the function and what we could use, say, the Ren and the Dumai, and I think the Yang and the Yin Chao Mai? I'm not very good at pronouncing them. Just so we know, like, what's their purpose? What do we use them for?
Yeah. So the Renmai is considered more of a yin-based vessel. So it is considered like a yin regulator. What does that mean? Some people might use it more for female patients, whereas the Dumai is more yang-based, so you might use it more for male clients. Lots of males and female clients, though, aren't exclusively yin or yang. You can have very yang dominant females and you can have very yin dominant males. And so going off vessels purely on the sex of the patient is not typically recommended. The Ran channel for me is actually my favourite in terms of every single channel or vessel we have in the body. It can access every single organ we have. And how do you do it? You basically, if you know where an organ is located, you find a Ren point that's in that location. So say we're wanting to treat the kidneys, well, they're lower down the body. So we're looking at Ren points that would be, say, from the belly button down. If we're wanting to treat, say, liver, gallbladder, stomach, spleen, we're looking at using Ren points that would be from the belly button to the bottom of the ribs. If we're wanting to treat the heart or the lungs, we would be on the chest somewhere. So the Renmai can basically regulate every organ we have, and the power generated through that vessel. I've yet to find a channel or a vessel that works better than that one. So when asked, which I typically am when I go to conferences and do workshops, they'll say, David, what's your favourite channel? I will say the Renmai because of that ability to regulate the organs, which by regulating the organs means essentially the rest of the body gets regulated if it can, because all the organs have jobs in the body, as most of you would know. And so you regulate the organ and it will then help to get those jobs of that organ functioning. If it's, say, low functioning, improve it. If it's excessively working too hard, help to tone it back, relax it down, settle it, sedate it, that sort of thing. The Dumai also regulates all of the organs. It's a little bit more difficult and often scares practitioners that haven't had the experience of treating the Do, because you do stick a needle between vertebrae. And so that sometimes freaks out students in regards to, oh my God, I'm going to needle into their spine, or I'm going to needle into nerves or something that'll paralyze them or whatever. It's completely safe. You've really got to go a very long way before you hit anything you shouldn't hit. But if you don't have experience with the Dumai, typically you just don't treat it. But again, it's very good. Giovanni, when he was alive, he did a book on channels, which included a section on the 8 extras, and he also did a book on psych. And he was a massive fan of the Dumai to regulate pretty much any emotion we have. And so at various points along the Dumai, he would say, this one's really good for mania, or this one's really good for bipolar, or this one's really good for depression. And again, it was typically based on organ relationships with the emotions. So if it was, say, kidneys and phobias and that type of thing, then you'd be looking at the Dumai lower down spine, say in the lumbar vertebra. That would regulate the kidneys, which would help to regulate the emotions attached to that. And the Dumai goes up over your head too, so it treats your shen, your spirit, your brain, which encompasses all of your emotions as well. What have I missed?
The Yang and Yin Chao, I think.
So the Daimai and the Chongmai, I think I kind of sort of talked about. The Chongmai typically, as I said, is very good for regulating the menstrual cycle, but it's good for blood-based things in general. Talked about the Daimai regulating energy above and below itself because it cuts through your body. The Chaomai and the Weimai tend to have a slightly faster effect because they're a little bit more external than the other 4. So the power they can generate will work on the patient's health a little bit more quickly. They're also, the Chao and the Weimai, this is kind of more really the last sort of 20-odd years where authors are using their clinical experience to talk about the 8 extras, and they're finding the Chao and the Weimai are really good for patients that have self-esteem issues. Maybe they're having problems accepting compliments. There's this thing called a heart shield, which we might get into in a future podcast. It's also called the pericardium, or Xinbao, Xinbao. Xin means heart, and Bao means embrace, hug, cuddle, that type of thing. So it's the Xinbao, or heart's embrace, or pericardium, or heart shield, wraps around your heart physically, but spiritually or Shen-based, it also wraps around you in your aura. Some people call it a biofield. So it kind of sits off your body a smidge. And how that works is it acts like a shield, but not one that repels everything, like a sieve. Maybe it's better off being called a heart sieve. You picture like when you next cook rice. What do you do after you've cooked it in the microwave or on the stove? You drain it, don't you? So when you drain it through your sieve, the water leaks out, but the rice stays in the sieve. And that's how your Xinbao, or heart's embrace, works. It's like a sieve, so it allows external compliments, external ideas to penetrate into your heart, so your heart accepts that and feels joy, contentment, harmony, feels at peace. It repels the damaging stuff that people say about you, the mean things, the things that aren't true, the things that aren't who you are. And so if the shield is working well, someone tells you you're a horrible human being, but you know that's not true. If the heart shield's working, it will bounce off the shield. So you don't take it into your heart, So then your heart doesn't take that mean thing and process it and go, am I that person? Are they right? Is this true? Because that's not doing you any favours. So what should happen theoretically is the bad thoughts bounce off the shield, the good thoughts come into your heart. But of course, what happens is some people have a bit of a mix-up in their shield, and they allow bad thoughts in and they allow good thoughts to be repelled. So you say to someone, oh, you're so amazing, you did such a good job of that meal tonight, like the flavour is really beautiful. And they go, oh, anyone could make that. Boing. The thought, your processes, your kind words don't go in and aren't accepted by the person. And so the shield is mucked up. They allow the bad thoughts in and they don't allow the good thoughts in. So that example of what we're talking about there is that the yin and yang chow mai and the yin and yang wei mai work on that shin bao, heart's embrace, the heart shield, to help it to understand the difference between what is right and wrong, what your body should accept and what it should not accept. That will help things like your self-esteem, your image, how you value yourself. It helps you with confidence in regards to being able to say no to people instead of being a yes man. It helps you understand what you really need in your life as opposed to not understanding that. And so you take on responsibilities that other people recommend for you but aren't really your true purpose. So it's taking these ideas and helping you really understand who you are, which adds in an element of selfishness. I get that, but at the end of the day, we need to love ourselves before we can love anyone else, before anyone else can love us. So that's what the Chow and the Wei Mai are starting to show us through clinical experience, through people like David Twicken, Yvonne Farrell. Earlier than that, it was Jeremy Ross was doing stuff like this. The problem is there's no clinical trials on it. There's no clinical research on it. It's all hearsay. It's Yvonne saying, my 25 years of clinical experience is showing me that this is what's happening, but there's no references, because how does she reference that? It's clinical experience. So people go, oh, they poo-poo what Yvonne's offering because they don't value her clinical experience, which everyone's entitled to do. I think that's a bit unfair because when you've got 25 plus years of clinical experience, how can that not count as some form of research? So that's what we're seeing through some of the books coming out now, is what these other four can offer us. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, Chinese medicine is sort of built off hearsay in a way. You know, there was no research back then. It's not black and white. It's very different to science. It's more of a philosophical art, really, until we can actually research it. So maybe they'll get there with something to back that up soon. But that's so interesting. I mean, everyone needs a little bit more self-worth. How do we actually, you know, activate that? Do you have to work on all four channels when you're treating someone? Can you maybe give us actual clinical treatments on how to do that?
Yeah, so I guess that's the next bit, is which one of those 8 vessels do you use? It still typically comes down to diagnostics. So in Australia, we diagnose patients using Zhang Fu patterns of disharmony. Other countries, America do, but then probably 50% of the colleges talk about 5-element diagnostics. There's a fair bit of that in Europe and the UK as well. So depending on your form of diagnosis, once you've worked out through your patient's signs and symptoms what your diagnosis is, well, then you can potentially target, say, 1 or 2 of the 8 extras based on that diagnosis. So short of there being, I guess, a clinical situation in this conversation, which we don't have, it's hard to say which one you would use. Which ones do what? I gave you a bit of a look at that, but obviously you would need to access a range of different textbooks to get a better sense of what each of the vessels do in order for you to decide which one to use. You do have to be a little bit careful that you don't overdo it. The 8 extras don't often give you a massive healing crisis 1 or 2 days after you treat the patient. They tend to take a while, and you might get the healing crisis months down the track. And then there's that issue with the confusion as to whether it was associated with the acupuncture treatment or other life issues. But we might have a chance to talk about that a little bit later or on another podcast. Let me just look at a different way of sort of explaining that as well. I mean, I guess for me, the 8 extras are something that I will consider using, but they're not going to be the first port of call. If my patient is a sort of a fairly straight line musculoskeletal condition or sports injury, or they've got a condition that I haven't had for a really long time, then I'm probably just going to use standard diagnostics and standard points. So say at the moment in spring in Australia, certainly in Brisbane, we're getting smashed in clinic with hay fever and asthma and sinusitis and that sort of thing. The pollens are out, the humidity's popping up. We've probably struggled a little bit through winter. Our defensive chi's a little bit weak, and so we're doing lots of lung diagnostics. And so we do lung points on the lung channel. We do a range of different points, say on the chest or the upper back. We don't necessarily use the 8 extras there. But it's definitely something that I would consider for strong mental and emotional problems where there's more than one organ diseased. So let's say someone's got severe constipation and maybe there's a little bit of irritable bowel syndrome or diverticulitis attached to it, and or bad breath, bad headaches on the front of the forehead. These types of things will often indicate a yang ming condition, which is stomach and large intestine. So stomach is in your middle energizer and your large intestine's in your lower energizer. They're two organs not close to one another, but they're both diseased at the same time. Then I would consider using an 8 extraordinary vessel. How would I do that? I could use the Renmai, but another option is that the stomach and the large intestine are both yang. So maybe I would consider the Dumai because the Dumai is a yang regulator. Mm-hmm. So I would consider points on the Dumai. How would that work? I'll probably talk about it in a minute. You have keys to unlock your 8 extras. And I guess this is as good a place as any to have this conversation. I'm assuming, Sandy. They're called opening and couple points. Collectively, all of them are called confluent points. So if I'm wanting to use the Dumai in that example I just gave you, I would want to use its opening point, its couple points, and then points on the Dumai. So and this is where the confusion comes about, which I think we'll talk about shortly. But let's just give you the example and then I'll let Sandy ask the next question. But in that example of, say, stomach, large intestine problems, it's yang ming, I've decided to use the Dumai. I would needle the opening point, which is small intestine 3. Then I would needle the coupled point, which is bladder 62. And then I would choose points on the Dumai, typically over the stomach and over the large intestine. So there's a range of different dew points that you could use there. And then my diagnosis was stomach and large intestine, so I might do some stomach channel points and some large intestine channel points. But the order of it is the opening points needled first, the couple points needled second, the Dumai points needled third, and then the remaining points needled. And then with the 8 extras, you typically take them all out in reverse. Do you have to do that? No. Are there other ways of doing it? Yes. But let's just picture an example that you're at the front door of your house and you have 2 deadbolts and a screen door that's locked. So you need 3 keys to get into your house. And that's what you are activating when you do the opening point, the couple point, and a point on the vessel itself. It's 3 separate keys unlocking all of the doors to allow you access to that vessel. And so it's like, well, there's the analogy. Then there's also there's so many points in the body that do so many different things. You kind of need to tell the body what you're trying to do when you put needles in. Sure, the body's smart, but this is like telling the body, open the Dumai, small intestine 3. There's 1 key unlocked. Small intestine 3, you're going to treat the Dumai today. Then you use bladder 62. There's the 2nd key in the 2nd lock, telling the body again, we're activating the Dumai today. And then you do some points on the Dumai. That's your 3rd key, unlocking the door, telling the body we're activating the Dumai today. Rather than small intestine 3 on its own being like, what am I using? What is this being used in the body for today? Because it treats neck pain, it treats headaches, it treats the small intestine, it regulates urinary dysfunction. It does so many things. So how does the body know what to use that point for? So that's what we do it for. Use the opening point, couple point, points on the vessel. Yeah.
That was actually going to be my question, so you just answered it all. I was going to ask the opening and coupling points and the direction of needling, so that's perfect. What about depth? Because they are a deeper channel. Is there something to the depth that we have to consider with these channels?
When I studied, we were very traditional Chinese needling back in that early to mid-90s. So thicker needles, deeper needling, strong stimulation of the needle. Do you feel it? Yep. Do you really feel it? Yep. Okay, now we stop. Or you feel it as the practitioner, the needle starting to get grabbed and being harder to move in and out. That was what we did when I went through. So that's the way I treated patients for probably a decade. And it hurts some people. But for hundreds of years, there's been this other way of treating, which is more, I guess, what they'd call Japanese style. Thinner needles, don't have to needle as deeply, don't have to necessarily stimulate really strong qi. And that's what I'm moving more into, but keeping with my kind of traditional Chinese medicine idea of putting the needle to the depth where the qi is typically located and then just leaving the needle. So don't stimulate, but put it down into that qi pocket, that channel. So for something like, say, small intestine 3, which is on the hand, sort of off that 5th knuckle, that point is actually, if you've done your acupuncture course in full, that you can needle that one very, very deeply, depending on the angle. But you don't have to. The qi pocket on a point like small intestine 3 is probably about half a sun in. If you don't go in far enough, you could maybe draw the qi out to the needle tip. If you go more into the qi itself, the needle's already activating it. Again, there's various ways, and it's outside the scope of this podcast anyway. So basically, I put the needle into that sort of qi pocket, which depending on the points could be half, 1.5 sun in, depending on the frame of the person, where it is in the body.
Okay, great. Thank you for covering that. I don't think anything's out of the scope of this podcast. That's actually really good information. Yeah. Okay, so you touched on the Dumai coupling points. Could you maybe just run us through the other 7 channels?
Yep, so the Renmai, its opening point is lung 7. So again, typically I would needle that first, and I'd probably do it bilaterally. So I'd do both lung 7s and then both kidney 6s, and then some Ren points, and then maybe points on the other on some other channels. There is argument that you can do unilateral needling with the coupled points. That's up to you. In that case, that might be, say, lung 7 on one side, kidney 6 on the other. A couple of years ago, when Australia had a live conference, I did a presentation on the 8 extras, and so did another gentleman the following day, where I do, say, both lung 7s, then both kidney 6s. He did a lung 7, then crossed over to the opposite side and did kidney 6. And then he went back up and did the remaining lung 7 and then crossed over to the other kidney 6. That was the way he did it. But even unilateral, left or right sides, you might choose based on whether your patient's male or female, or intuit what's the best sides. There's no right or wrong. If you're seeing results with your use of the 8 extras, then it doesn't necessarily matter. But that's sort of the way I would do it. So that's the Renmai, lung 7, kidney 6. As I said, the Dumai is small intestine 3, bladder 62. You'll notice that that's having needles on the hands and the feet. The Chongmai is spleen 4, pericardium 6. So again, we've got something on the foot with something on the wrist. The Dumai is gallbladder 41 and Sanjiao 5. Same thing, again, something on the foot, something on the wrist. Then we've got the Yang Chao Mai, which is, what happens now is the points all swap around, which makes it a bit confusing. It also opens up the argument that the 8 extras are silly and don't work because there's shared points, even though they're different vessels. Obviously, I don't adhere to that. The experience I've seen and the results I've seen with 8 extras is phenomenal. But anyway, to continue, the Yang Chao Mai is bladder 62 as the opening point and small intestine 3 as it's coupled. Yin Chao Mai is kidney 6 as opening and lung 7 as coupled. And the last two are the Yang Wei and the Yin Wei. The Yang Wei opening is Sanjiao 5 coupled by gallbladder 41. And then the Yin Wei Mai is peri 6 as the opening point coupled with spleen 4. So what that also argues, I guess the case is that whenever you do one of the 8 extras and you do the opening and coupled points, you kind of almost can't not have done a second one of the 8 extras. For example, when we talked about the Dumai and doing the small intestine 3 and bladder 62, you've done bladder 62 and small intestine 3, which is the Yang Chao Mai. And that's why you need to be a bit careful with the 8 extras, because if you do a whole bunch of opening and couple points, before you know it, you might have ended up doing 2, 4, 8 of them all at once. And that's the caution. The more of the 8 extras you do, the more you're going to rock their world at some point in the future. And it's rocking them to a point where they can't ignore the event. So safety first would be using one of the 8 extras, which then ends up essentially treating a second one.
Okay. Is there any other cautions or, contraindications or controversy you want to share about the 8 extras? You just touched on a little bit there.
The controversy is around their value. If you are someone that abides by classics and pre-modern text, so essentially any book ever written before, say, 1950, when traditional Chinese medicine was essentially created by the Communist Party in China. So anything before 1950 are typically pre-modern texts or classical texts. So we're talking about things like Yellow Emperor Classic, Classic of Difficulties, all these sorts of ones. So if you're someone that adheres to more that sort of ancient approach, more the classical approach, there isn't a lot on the 8 extras. And And because of the fact that there's not a lot on it, then you might say it doesn't work because the classics don't really have a lot on them. There's not a lot of pre-modern texts on it. Really, if you want a lot on 8 extras, you've got to go to the last 15 years. And we've had a whole bunch of 8 extras books come out in the last 10 to 20 years. If you are research-driven in the way that you structure your clinic, there isn't a lot on the 8 extras again. And so you might go, oh, they don't work because where's the clinical trials? Where's that proof? Where's the proof that small intestine 3 and bladder 62 open the Dumai so that my patient gets the benefits of that vessel? Show me the proof. Show me the hundreds of patients that have been treated using this method to treat a thing. And so you have that camp that probably don't really value that extras as well. So, which is a lot of the camps. And the third camp that I see is people that like the classics, use some of it, and also like the sort of clinical research. So in a lot of ways, there's not enough out there that you can say this is proof. It's lovely. Yvonne Farrell's got, a good book on the 8 extras, but it's not referenced, all based on clinical experience. We said that at the start of the podcast. Does that mean the book is stupid and you can argue that the 8 extras don't work? Well, that would be very small-minded of us, because we're taking someone with incredible clinical knowledge that Yvonne has and not counting it for anything. You have thousands and thousands of people that Yvonne has treated over the years, and her supervisors that she has used that have treated thousands and thousands of people. Does that not count for anything? My own experience, it's all well and good. I'm David Hartmann. I believe what David Hartmann has to say because I've seen it with my own eyes. So I see it. That activates the sense in me. I can write about it. All my senses are activated from the clinical experience. But if you don't know David Hartmann, so what? David says this does this. So what? And this is the problem with 8 extras, is that lack of adequate proof or written content over the last 2,000 odd years.
Okay, so let's unplug from academia for a second. And in your clinical experience, cautions with the 8 extras, case studies. Have you got any case studies you want to share? Because, going into genetic material in my perspective, is big. So I'm sure you've got some.
Yeah, I guess then just there's so many examples. One this will take too long to explain, almost needs its own podcast. I use the 8 extras on someone, and still the most incredible result I've ever seen. I treated a lady, and it didn't just treat her, it treated her parents and grandparents and treated her kids and grandkids. I treated one person, and it treated 5 generations in that family. So again, that could be for another time. Mind-blowing that one person can be treated and essentially you treat 5 generations. That's what the 8 extras is capable of. From a personal experience, when I got back into the 8 extras again after having been told that they were terrible by my teacher, I thought, well, I guess the only way to really see how these vessels work is to do clinical experience. And I thought I better be careful, so I'll treat myself first. So I treated myself with the 8 extras. I started doing some of them. I'd read that they were really good for dynamic energy release. And so I experimented on myself, and I used to play very high-level sport, played for Australia in a World Cup. And what I did was experiment with myself about giving myself a huge release of energy before these big tournaments. Before I played for Queensland or whatever, I would I would do my training. So typically 12 weeks out of big tournaments, I would start getting fit, really healthy, and I would build my energy with acupuncture, build my vital substances, and then basically 24 hours before my first game, I opened up all of the 8 extras. It's sorry for laughing, but I still can't quite believe that I did that. But I'm glad I did, because it gave me a real good insight into what's capable. So it basically opened up all the 8 extras, which had been flooded with all my excess chi and blood and body fluid and jing that I'd been pumping into them for 12 weeks. They opened up. And so for 7 to 10 days, I was almost unstoppable. I had unlimited energy. I played my sport, didn't make mistakes, didn't need to have a substitution. I was on the ball. My brain was working. My body was not fatiguing as much. I was resting at night times. I was switching off and then waking up again supercharged. I seemed to recover from the fatigue. Lactic acid build up in muscles. It wasn't happening as much. It was unbelievable. And as I said, for 7 to 10 days, I was like Superman. And then I ran out of energy. And as it happens typically with everyone I've ever treated, around 7 to 10 days, you go from Superman to nothing. You wake up one morning and picture like you've been swallowed up by your mattress and you're laying like a foot down inside your mattress and you've got to try and claw your way out and function for the day. That's what happened. It took me a couple of days to get back to functioning again. So that was a really good experience to give myself, to show me what can happen. And very quickly, what I did not realise is that the 8 extras, because they are that deepest core level in you, that when you activate all of them, your body starts to go, what genetic material is David storing that is counterproductive to his better health? And so here's what happened to me. When I was born, I didn't want to come out. In fact, my right arm came out first, and to get me out, the doctors dislocated my right shoulder. They used forceps, suction cups to get me out. Almost died. They put me in a humidity crib immediately. I didn't get hugged by my mum. And then they threw in the measles and mumps vaccines, and I got measles straight away and started again. And as I recovered through life, I'd always been a real sickly child. And I was always having problems with my right shoulder. And playing sport and diving around on the football field everywhere, I kept getting this kind of acute shoulder discomfort, almost like an acute frozen shoulder, which would always happen no matter what I did. And the 8 extras stopped that. What happened is I dived, just gave a try in footy, and I landed really funny on my shoulder. Like I'd never landed on it that way before. And this was about 6 months after I'd done the 8 extras treatment on myself, where I'd opened up all of them. It was the next football tournament. And I got up, almost passed out, faced the wrong way. So they were still attacking and I was facing the wrong direction. So they were coming at me to try and score. I was facing the wrong way. Then I fell over. They stopped the game. They called an ambulance, took me to the hospital. Thought I'd broken something. I was fine. I didn't have anything wrong with me physically. I was crying. I was releasing a lot of energy. And after that event, I've never, ever had any acute shoulder problems ever again. And I released that trauma of my birth story, which was all locked in my right shoulder from when it was dislocated at my birth, which was creating the trauma, but also the emotion attached to it. So I released that emotional trauma, as I said, after landing on my shoulder, by crying and laughing and all sorts of different emotions. And that's absolutely without doubt as a result of what the 8 extras did for me. And then that 6 months down the track, that release of energy, which has resulted, as I said, in me, releasing energy that my body didn't need anymore. And I hope I explained that well, but
no, it's good.
So many stories of that, dozens and dozens of stories like that, of people that are releasing trauma in their life that they either got themselves or created themselves or was genetically passed on as well. That's just one example.
Oh, that's great. I think birth trauma is such a big carrier for so many things throughout people's lifetime that, if there's an ability to tap into the 8 extras to release that, then that's powerful. Powerful stuff. And obviously using it with caution, I guess, like you're saying, working with people where they're at in their life. Are they ready for it? And that sort of thing. I guess having a trust connection with your patient, because if you go and do something and you haven't got that trust, you stir emotions up for them. I mean, it can be a big thing for people to have these healing experiences coming through acupuncture, especially if it's their first session or something like that too. Is there anything you want to touch on there with, I guess, maybe the communication between the practitioner and the patient before going into the 8 extras, maybe as a last question to wrap it up there?
Sure. Yeah, and then that just leads into that cautionary kind of approach, I guess, which is a good way to wind up. As I said, I typically will look at treating through other means initially, and if I'm just not feeling like I'm getting the results, then I would consider the 8 extras. At that point, that's when we have the conversation. If a patient comes to me and I just, through that diagnosis, I just am convinced that the 8 extras are the way to go immediately, we have that conversation. It's just saying to them that they're very powerful. I don't do all 8 of them. I think I've done that maybe half a dozen times ever, apart from myself. And that was after having tried pretty much everything else I could try and not really getting the result I was looking for. Most other people, you just do 1 or 2, and then you might work your way through, and eventually you end up having done all 8, but that could have been after 8 treatments. It's like you do 1 or 2, and then you let the body process that information. The next time they come in, you might just do a normal treatment. Mm-hmm. And the next time they come in, you might do a different 2. And let them process. And that baby steps is important with the 8 extras because the release is less profound, but still really powerful in its own right. And that's all you just got to warn them about, is that there's going to be some release. And the thing about the 8 extras is when you're bringing something from deep in the body out to the surface to process it, the 8 extras don't go, oh, this is too much for the person to handle. We'll just give them a bit and then we'll just deal with this other stuff later on. It's out, it's coming out, and there is no way to stop it coming out. So there will be emotional release, there will be physical release. And again, if you've done it in baby steps, it'll be less surprising, less powerful, less intimidating, less overwhelming. The more you do, the more full on it is. And so that's just kind of that process of being careful with it, but knowing that they know what they're in for. It's our duty of care. It's part of our process of permission to treat, is that we talk to them about what you want to do, what might happen, and that approach, I guess.
And so just to kind of one last question,
regarding the treatment. I mean, you sort of mentioned then you might do a couple of the channels, then a normal treatment, then a couple more. Are you sort of tapping into all 8 channels over a duration of a treatment with most patients? Or, because for me personally, I've used, the Chong and the Ren and whatnot a lot with fertility and gynae stuff, do obviously, and then, rarely do I use those other channels. But is that something we should be considering, or do we go off the signs and symptoms of the patient?
Oh, look, both would work, and using them based on what you know that they've been good for. There's a lot more literature that's come out recently on the 8 extras that give you a different look at what each of them does. But definitely if I'm using them, it would be right now, I'm in my clinic, I will do 1, which, as I said, will have an effect on the second one because of those opening couple of points. So 1 is the primary. There's a second one that jumps in for the ride, and that's the treatment. There might be some points on channels that are not part of those 8 extras, but it's all part of the process of what I think is best for them that day. And then the next time they come in, there might be no 8 extra stuff done at all. And that might not ever be done again, or we might explore the same ones again or different ones. Again, there is effects that happen swiftly. The caution always comes down to that deeper stuff that they don't understand and we can't possibly comprehend as practitioners. We don't know what crap is down in their body that they need to release. So it will start to edge its way out. And as I said, just knowing that, what was the other thing I was going to say there? There was... The value is that your body doesn't want that anymore. It hasn't wanted it probably ever, but it's taking up space, and it's not allowing things we do want in. So the 8 extras actually get rid of something that is no longer self-serving, allowing for opportunities and things to come in that are what we do need, what we do want, what's for our higher good. So the fact that the 8 extras can bring out this stuff we don't want to allow the better things in, if that's all I told someone, then there's excitement. Because of that, the possibility that we can help them with. But just knowing that thing they don't want anymore could be big, and it could take a little bit of time. But if it's coming out, you just tell them, if you ever have a really, really full-on morning, if you wake up and you're different or there's some really heavy stuff going on, you call me and I'll fit you in. It doesn't matter if you've got a fully booked day, you fit them in somehow because they need you that day. And then it's probably just a nice, easy treatment just to help them process that event. You're not trying to suppress it. You're just nurturing them through the event. That's the rule, basically. They have to call me. If it's Sunday, and I don't work on Sundays, they come in anyway. It's just you make it fit. It's just nurturing them through that event. That would be how I would sort of tackle it if I am really working on it.
No, that's beautifully said, yeah. And, I mean, the words you used, I was almost thinking of all, my conception patients, It's letting go of something that's no longer needed and creating space for something to come in. So it's like a baby. So, and there's so much emotional stuff that goes with fertility. So, great. Yeah. David, I think we've covered heaps. You've, given us so much insight. It's really cool to dive more into the 8 extras. I think you taught me them anyway back in college. They are something that I've always worked with. But I have definitely stuck to those main 4. So, now it's given me new insight to maybe dabble into some of those other channels, especially around that stuff you mentioned on self-worth. That's big. Who doesn't need that? So is there anything else you want to wrap up with? Because, is there anything else you'd like to finish with on the 8 extras?
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly, I am now starting to look at incorporating the 8 extras with this thing called the Wu Shen, or 5 spirits. So typically if I treat the 5 spirits, I kind of treat them as their own thing. So the 5 spirits are the Hun, the Po, the Yi, the Ji, and the Shen. And they're all what defines us as a person. They all got their own little jobs in the body. It kind of comes down to this idea that you think up an idea, it comes down into your body, you process it as an idea that your body needs. If it is, it becomes an action. That's kind of how the 5 spirits work in a 10-second flat description. But typically, if you're having problems with coming up with an idea, then that might mean that you target the Horn or the Po. But what I'm looking at now is how I might be able to use the 8 extras to treat the 5 spirits rather than treating the 5 spirits as themselves. Because it's logical, based on this last hour or so that we've been chatting, it's the natural extension that the 8 extras should be able to treat the 5 spirits and vice versa. So that's my next project, is looking at how that will work out. Once that kind of hypothetical qualitative research is done, then we'll start treating patients, which becomes the quantitative experience. That's the next step with the 8 extras for me, is combining the two and then looking at how that can work on much more specific things like people's personality traits, their mental health conditions. So tying into things like, well, you mentioned it, Sandy, self-esteem issues. What's my point to life? Why am I here? Things like poor decision-making, whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, timidity, shyness, apathy, even down to things like bipolar, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress, addictions, obsessive-compulsive disorder, phobias. I could just keep going, panic attacks, depression, anxiety. It's extraordinary. It's what we're capable of doing with Chinese medicine, whether it be the 8 extras or not. But that's the watch this space. That's where I'm going next, is tying the 8 extras and 5 spirits into that. So I'm really excited about it.
That's our next podcast, David.
Sure.
No, thank you.
Sounds good.
It's so good to have you on. Like I said, David, you were my teacher 15 or 16 years ago. I can't remember how, early 2000s. And you were talking about this stuff back then. So it's really cool. We need to share this information in the Acu world. Of course, there's people out there doing it, but there's people like yourself that are really doing it. So like you just said, tying those two things together, you're really paving the way of some of the foundations to where we can use these amazing tools like the 8 extras and combining it with things like the Shen, the 5 spirits.
Yeah.
It's cool. So yeah, I just want to say big thank you once again for coming on and taking time out, and we'll definitely love to have you back on down the track if you can make the time, and good luck with all your future endeavours with the college in the UK, or your webinars, your books. For those listening, David has the acupuncture point combination book. What's the name of the title? Sorry, David, do you want to say it correctly?
It's a bit wordy. The principles and practical application of acupuncture point combinations. So, yeah, essentially getting practitioners to look at how they treat and see if they could do it better.
Yep.
By taking you through a range of different point combinations and encouraging you to go, you know what, I can be even better than I am now. Because I don't think you should ever want to stop being the best acupuncturist you can be until the day you stop. Yeah. That's what that book's about.
Don't think many people want to do that. I think everyone's it's almost an addiction, the learning that comes with it. It's a fun addiction, really, isn't it? And you've got webinars and some courses coming out. Where can our listeners find that information?
You can get a lot of this information. Since I spoke to you in the last podcast, I finally have a website. So it's David Hartmann. Hartmann is Hartmann. So David Hartmann, TCM.com. unilateralneedling.com. You'll be able to find some stuff on there where you can access all my different products. There's also a blog on there. I typically put something up every fortnight. That's all free. But otherwise, you can get it from Healthy Seminars, eLotus, TCM Academy, China Books, Singing Dragon, Elsevier. There's lots of places. But you can contact me through that website as well. There's a little pop-up where if you want to contact me, it sends an email straight to me. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to jump on there. Heaps of free content too and stuff you can buy as well.
All right, great. Thank you so much, David, once again for taking the time out and sharing your wisdom on the 8 extras. It's been really interesting to get that insight on these amazing channels and how we can use them more. So thank you.
Thank you for listening. I have been a practitioner of naturopathic and Chinese medicine for over a decade. I have a master's degree of health science and I am an academic lecturer at Australia's leading natural medicine college. I am available worldwide online for bookings. Simply go to sandyrosshealth.com.